He had no idea he was evicting the woman who secretly owned the $15 million real estate investment portfolio that included not just the house he was living in rent-free, but the entire neighborhood he thought he was inheriting, and whose quote, grateful response would be selling everything from under him and leaving him homeless on the streets he thought I belonged on. Before we dive into this incredible story of real estate revenge and the property empire my entitled stepson never knew I controlled, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me about your worst experience with ungrateful family members who thought they owned what was actually yours. And subscribe so you never miss stories like this one, about what happens when people assume elderly women are powerless dependents, and discover just how wrong they can be when arrogance meets property ownership that could destroy everything they thought they were entitled to. My name is Margaret Whitfield. I'm 72 years old, and this story begins 14 months ago, when I made what seemed like a generous decision to allow my late husband's son Derek and his family to move into our family home in Maplewood Heights, Connecticut, a decision that would reveal his true character and teach him the most expensive lesson about treating elderly relatives like burdens whose generosity could be exploited without consequences he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But to understand how Derek Morrison, the ambitious real estate agent who thought he could build his future by manipulating and humiliating elderly family members, ended up evicted from every property in 3 counties and lost his real estate license along with his career prospects, you need to know who I was before my carefully maintained image as a dependent widow concealed one of the most extensive private real estate portfolios in Connecticut. For 38 years, I was Margaret Whitfield, principal partner and founding owner of Whitfield Property Holdings, one of Connecticut's most influential private real estate investment companies controlling over 200 residential and commercial properties across Fairfield County, including luxury homes, apartment complexes, shopping centers, and the commercial developments that determined property values and neighborhood growth throughout the most desirable areas between New York City and Hartford. I wasn't just living in our family home as a dependent widow. I was the strategic architect responsible for property acquisitions worth millions of dollars and controlling the real estate relationships that determined which agents succeeded at the highest levels and which ones never worked in premium markets again. My portfolio included waterfront estates in Greenwich worth $8 million each, commercial complexes in Stamford generating over $400,000 monthly in rental income, luxury apartment buildings in Fairfield housing 300 families, and historic properties in New Canaan that had been converted into profitable mixed-use developments preserving community character while maximizing investment returns. My responsibilities encompassed identifying undervalued properties before other investors recognized their potential, negotiating complex acquisition deals that required sophisticated understanding of zoning laws and development possibilities, coordinating with local government officials who determined permit approvals and property tax assessments, and implementing the investment strategies that had turned modest initial investments into a real estate empire worth over $15 million across some of Connecticut's most exclusive residential markets. But these achievements only tell part of the story about the complexity and critical importance of real estate influence at the highest levels of property investment and development. When you're responsible for property portfolios that determine neighborhood character and property values for entire communities, managing tenant relationships that affect hundreds of families' housing stability, and preserving investment strategies that have been refined through 4 decades of market cycles and economic changes, every decision carries enormous weight and consequences that extend far beyond individual property success to impact entire communities and local economic ecosystems throughout Connecticut's most competitive real estate markets. During my first year in real estate, 1985, I started with a single duplex in Norwalk that I purchased for $120,000 using savings from my job as a municipal budget analyst. While other investors were pursuing quick flips and speculative developments, I focused on building long-term relationships with reliable tenants, maintaining properties to the highest standards, and gradually expanding my portfolio through careful market analysis and conservative financing that protected against economic downturns and market volatility. That first duplex taught me essential lessons about property management, tenant relations, and the importance of treating real estate investment as a business that served communities rather than simply extracting profits. I learned to screen tenants carefully, maintain properties proactively, and build relationships with contractors, property managers, and local officials that would become the foundation for decades of successful property investment and community development. By 1990, my portfolio had grown to 12 properties throughout Fairfield County, including single-family homes, small apartment buildings, and a commercial property in downtown Westport that housed 3 local businesses. Each acquisition was carefully researched and financed conservatively, allowing me to weather the early 1990s recession that destroyed many over-leveraged investors while actually expanding my holdings by purchasing distressed properties from investors who had pursued aggressive growth strategies without adequate financial reserves. The 1990s proved to be a decisive decade for establishing Whitfield Property Holdings as a major force in Connecticut real estate. While larger development companies focused on massive projects and corporate clients, I specialized in community-based properties that served local residents and businesses while generating steady rental income and long-term appreciation. This approach allowed me to build deep relationships with municipal officials, local business owners, and community organizations that provided early access to development opportunities and protected my properties from negative zoning changes and community opposition. One of my most significant early successes involved the Riverside Commons project in Stamford, where I converted a deteriorating 1940s factory building into 24 affordable housing units that preserved the building's historic character while providing quality rental housing for working families. The project required coordinating with historic preservation societies, obtaining complex zoning variances, and managing a renovation that took 18 months and cost $2.4 million. But the result was a property that generated $28,000 monthly in rental income while earning recognition from the Connecticut Historical Society for outstanding historic preservation. The Riverside Commons project became a model for similar developments throughout Fairfield County, demonstrating that historic preservation and profitable real estate investment could work together to benefit communities while generating excellent returns for investors. The success attracted attention from other property owners who wanted to pursue similar projects, leading to consulting opportunities that provided additional income while expanding my knowledge of specialized property development and historic renovation techniques. During the 2008 financial crisis that devastated real estate markets and destroyed investment portfolios throughout the country, eliminating millions of dollars in property values and forcing countless investors into bankruptcy, I coordinated protective strategies that literally saved dozens of properties and hundreds of tenant families across our portfolio. Working 16-hour days for 8 months straight, I restructured mortgage arrangements in real time, negotiated with banks and creditors to prevent foreclosures of properties that had taken decades to acquire and develop, managed tenant assistance programs that kept families housed during the economic crisis when most landlords were pursuing evictions, and implemented refinancing strategies that allowed struggling property owners to survive while maintaining the investment standards that had taken generations to establish and perfect. I remember specifically working with the Henderson family, who owned a small but valuable apartment building in Westport that had been providing affordable housing for working families for 2 generations, specializing in quality rental units for teachers, firefighters, and municipal employees. When the financial crisis hit, their property was threatened by mortgage defaults and maintenance costs that made it impossible to maintain quality housing while covering loan payments that had become unsustainable due to declining property values and tenant income reductions that affected rental collection rates throughout the region. I coordinated emergency financing through our network of private investors, helped them restructure their mortgage terms to sustainable levels that reflected realistic property values and rental income projections, and provided the property management expertise that not only saved their building but actually allowed them to expand into additional affordable housing projects during a time when most small property owners were losing everything to foreclosure and bankruptcy. The assistance included connecting them with contractors who could perform essential maintenance at reduced costs, helping them access state and federal programs that provided rental assistance to struggling tenants, and sharing property management strategies that had proven successful during previous economic downturns. The Henderson apartment building, which had been on the verge of foreclosure and losing their family's housing legacy, not only survived but thrived during the crisis, eventually expanding to 3 additional properties in Fairfield County and receiving recognition from the Connecticut Housing Authority for outstanding affordable housing provision in 2015. Their success became a model for other small property owners facing similar challenges, and their story was featured in a Connecticut Business Journal article about real estate resilience that specifically credited Whitfield Property Holdings' guidance and financial coordination for their remarkable recovery and expansion. But the 2008 crisis also provided unprecedented opportunities for expansion, as distressed properties became available at significant discounts from their pre-crisis values. While many investors were forced to sell or faced foreclosure, my conservative financing and substantial cash reserves allowed me to acquire 12 additional properties between 2009 and 2012, including a luxury estate in Greenwich that had been listed for $6.2 million but sold for $3.8 million due to the owner's financial difficulties, and a commercial complex in Norwalk that generated $45,000 monthly in rental income but was available for 40% below its previous market value. These crisis acquisitions became some of the most profitable investments in my portfolio, appreciating dramatically as markets recovered while generating substantial rental income throughout the economic downturn. The Greenwich estate, for example, was worth over $7 million by 2015, while producing rental income of $18,000 monthly from a tech executive who needed temporary housing during a corporate relocation. The Norwalk commercial complex expanded to house 12 local businesses and generated over $65,000 monthly by 2018, as the area experienced significant economic growth and business development. Whitfield Property Holdings specialized in residential investment properties, commercial real estate development, property management services, and maintaining the industry relationships that determined which real estate agents received referrals for premium properties, exclusive listings, and high-value client relationships. A mistaken property evaluation could cost investors millions in lost opportunities and poor acquisitions in markets where property values could fluctuate dramatically based on development trends and neighborhood transitions. Errors in agent recommendations could result in transaction disasters and professional failures that ended careers before they started. Failures in property management could lead to tenant problems and maintenance issues that destroyed property values and investor confidence that had taken years to build through consistent excellence and reliable property performance. My expertise in high-level real estate operations extended beyond our investment company to consulting relationships with real estate firms including Coldwell Banker, Sotheby's International, and William Reveiss, municipal planning departments throughout Fairfield County, and industry organizations including the Connecticut Association of Realtors and National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts. I helped establish the certification standards that determined which agents were qualified for handling luxury properties and estate sales, trained property evaluators in accurate market analysis and investment potential assessment so they could properly advise clients about property values and development opportunities, and develop the professional standards that smaller real estate agencies could use to verify their competence and reliability to discerning clients who valued expertise over trendy marketing approaches that prioritized quick sales over accurate property evaluation. One of my most significant consulting achievements involved working with the Fairfield County Planning Commission, which managed over $500 million in development projects and zoning decisions that affected property values throughout the region, including many residential developments that determined housing availability and community character for generations. The Commission was facing potential state intervention due to inconsistent development standards and conflicts between longtime residents and new development proposals, with newer commissioners pushing aggressive growth policies while established members insisted on preserving community character, creating confusion and uncertainty in property development that affected investor confidence throughout the county. I spent 18 months restructuring their approval processes, implementing sustainable development protocols that resolved conflicts by creating separate guidelines for historic preservation and new construction zones, and creating property evaluation standards based on community impact assessments that actually increased development approval rates by 60% while preserving neighborhood character for established communities. The program became so successful that it attracted attention from planning commissions across New England, who specifically came to Connecticut to study sustainable development approaches that couldn't be implemented anywhere else in the Northeast. The commission work provided detailed insight into how zoning decisions affected property values and development opportunities, knowledge that proved invaluable for timing property acquisitions, and predicting neighborhood transitions that would affect long-term investment returns. Understanding zoning patterns also allowed me to identify properties with development potential that other investors missed, leading to several highly profitable acquisitions, including a 4-acre parcel in New Canaan that was rezoned for luxury residential development, increasing its value from $800,000 to $2.4 million within 3 years. These consulting opportunities provided substantial additional income that enhanced our family's already considerable financial resources, but more importantly, they gave me comprehensive understanding of how real estate markets function, how property values are determined under the extreme pressure of maintaining community standards in rapidly changing markets, and how family members often underestimate elderly relatives' expertise and financial influence when they assume those relatives are just dependent widows, rather than recognizing their sophisticated understanding of property ownership and real estate dynamics. The most disturbing cases I encountered during my consulting work involved younger family members who systematically exploited elderly relatives' property ownership and real estate knowledge, treating traditional home ownership as free resources to be appropriated, rather than understanding the decades of investment expertise and financial planning that property portfolios represented. I witnessed situations where adult children, people who should have understood the value of property ownership and the complexity of real estate management, would manipulate their aging relatives into sharing property access under false pretenses, claiming temporary housing needs or family assistance projects while actually planning to establish permanent residence and inheritance claims without proper legal arrangements, compensation, or respect for property ownership rights. I remember the case of Dorothy Chen, an 78-year-old widow whose son convinced her to let him move into her family home with his wife and children for what was supposedly a, quote, temporary arrangement while they saved money for their own house. Dorothy believed she was helping her family achieve homeownership and providing grandchildren with stable housing during their parents' financial difficulties. But I discovered through industry contacts that the son had actually been planning to establish permanent residence and claim inheritance rights to force Dorothy into assisted living so he could control her property worth over $1.2 million. The son's strategy involved gradually taking over household decisions and property maintenance responsibilities while convincing Dorothy that she was becoming too frail to manage homeownership independently, techniques for gaining legal guardianship that he had researched online and implemented systematically to gain control of property without paying for it, or acknowledging Dorothy's continued ownership rights and decision-making authority. He had consulted with elder law attorneys about guardianship procedures, researched assisted living facilities that would accept Dorothy, and even obtained preliminary property valuations to understand the financial benefits of controlling her real estate assets. When I investigated further, I discovered that the son had not only been manipulating Dorothy's living situation but was actively marketing himself to potential homebuyers as the owner of Dorothy's property, showing the house to prospective purchasers while describing Dorothy as a, quote, temporary resident who would be, quote, moving to senior care soon. The emotional devastation to Dorothy when she learned about this betrayal was heartbreaking. She felt that her own family had violated the trust and property rights that represented her financial security and independence that she had worked 40 years to establish and protect. But beyond professional achievements and expertise, my real estate career had taught me invaluable lessons about respect, family loyalty, and how people's behavior changes dramatically when they believe they can exploit elderly family members who appear to be dependent homeowners but may actually control significant property portfolios and industry influence that could make or break their housing situations and financial futures with a single property decision or professional recommendation. I had observed thousands of family property dynamics during real estate consultations and property management over 4 decades. I had seen devoted families who honored elderly relatives' property ownership and included them respectfully in housing decisions, making efforts to preserve family homeownership while adapting properties for aging needs that maintained independence and property rights. These families understood that elderly relatives' property ownership represented decades of financial planning and investment expertise that deserved respect, proper legal protection, and inclusion in any housing arrangements that affected property use and ownership rights. The Johnson family in Darien provided an excellent example of respectful family property relationships. When 84-year-old Robert Johnson wanted to remain in his family home but needed assistance with maintenance and daily activities, his children worked with him to develop a plan that preserved his ownership and decision-making authority while providing necessary support. They hired professional caregivers, arranged for property maintenance services, and established legal arrangements that protected Robert's interests while allowing family members to assist with property management without claiming ownership or control rights. The family respected Robert's wishes about property modifications, consulted with him about major maintenance decisions, and ensured that any financial assistance was properly documented to protect everyone's interests and prevent future conflicts about property ownership and inheritance rights. When Robert eventually decided to sell the property and move to assisted living, the decision was entirely his choice, made with full family support and proper legal counsel that ensured he received fair market value and retained control over his financial resources and housing decisions. But I had also witnessed families who dismissed elderly members' property ownership as outdated when inheritance opportunities became attractive, who viewed traditional homeownership as obstacles to their own housing plans rather than understanding that property ownership represents decades of financial sacrifice and expertise that forms the foundation for family financial security. These families treated elderly relatives as inconvenient holders of valuable properties, rather than recognizing them as experienced property owners whose housing decisions required respect and legal protection, regardless of family convenience or housing needs. The Morrison family in Westport illustrated the destructive patterns that emerged when adult children viewed elderly relatives' property ownership as entitlement, rather than recognizing legitimate ownership rights that required respect and legal protection. When 81-year-old Helen Morrison inherited her family's waterfront property worth $2.8 million, her adult children immediately began pressuring her to sell the property and downsize to senior housing so they could receive inheritance distributions while she was still alive to see them enjoy the money. When Helen refused to sell property that represented her security and independence, her children began a systematic campaign to convince her that she was too old to manage homeownership responsibilities, that the property was too much work for someone her age, and that she would be happier in a senior community where she wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and property management. They brought in contractors who provided inflated estimates for property maintenance, showed her promotional materials for expensive senior living facilities, and repeatedly emphasized the property ownership represented for someone in her 80s. The children's pressure eventually wore down Helen's resistance, and she agreed to sell the property for significantly below market value to facilitate a quick sale that would provide immediate inheritance distributions. But within 6 months of moving to senior housing, Helen realized that she had been manipulated into giving up the independence and financial security that property ownership had provided, trading a waterfront estate worth millions for a small apartment, and declining health that resulted from losing the purposeful activity and community connections that homeownership had provided. These observations had given me sophisticated understanding of property exploitation patterns and the warning signs that indicate when people view elderly relatives' homeownership as free housing resources to be claimed, rather than understanding that property ownership should be honored and protected through respectful legal arrangements, rather than manipulation and emotional exploitation, without acknowledgement, compensation, or legal protection for property owners' rights. The warning signs were always similar: adult children who suddenly became very interested in, quote, helping with house maintenance when they needed housing themselves, timing their assistance offers to coincide with their own financial difficulties, rather than demonstrating genuine concern for elderly relatives' housing needs and property maintenance requirements. Family members who moved into elderly relatives' homes claiming temporary financial emergencies, while actually planning to establish permanent residence and inheritance claims that had been researched and planned in advance through online legal resources and inheritance planning materials. Property managers who worked with our company often reported concerning patterns where adult children would accompany elderly property owners to meetings about maintenance issues, gradually taking over conversations and decision-making processes, while positioning themselves as the quote 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 quote. These adult children would ask detailed questions about property values, maintenance costs, and management procedures, while framing their interest as helping their parents make informed decisions, but their questions revealed intentions to gain control over property decisions, rather than supporting elderly relatives' continued independence and ownership authority. Most concerning were the family members who gradually gained access to elderly relatives' property documents, financial records, and legal paperwork under the guise of, quote, helping with paperwork while actually cataloging valuable property assets for their own housing plans, often photographing deeds and financial documents, without revealing their true intentions to establish legal claims and inheritance rights for personal housing advantage. These exploitative family members would convince elderly relatives that property paperwork was too complicated for them to manage independently, that legal documents needed to be organized for their protection, and that younger family members were better equipped to understand complex property ownership and financial arrangements. The gradual takeover of property decision-making often escalated to situations where adult children would begin making unilateral decisions about property maintenance, tenant relationships, and even property sales without proper consultation or legal authority from actual property owners. In several cases I witnessed through consulting work, elderly property owners discovered that their adult children had been negotiating with potential buyers, consulting with real estate agents about property values, and even showing properties to prospective purchasers without permission or legal authority to represent the actual property owners in any real estate transactions. My marriage to Robert Whitfield had been a partnership built on shared passion for real estate investment, complementary property expertise, and commitment to building a property portfolio that honored sound investment principles while providing long-term financial security that could benefit our extended family through proper estate planning and legal arrangements. Robert was a licensed real estate attorney who had specialized in property law since 1975 and started with residential closings in Stamford, gradually building an impressive practice throughout Fairfield County that specialized in complex property transactions, estate planning, and investment property law covering different property types like residential estates, commercial developments, and mixed-use properties that required sophisticated legal expertise. Robert's investment philosophy was methodical and strategically brilliant. He identified undervalued properties in developing neighborhoods before other investors recognized their potential, developed relationships with reliable contractors and property managers before competitors discovered them, and created property acquisition strategies that built long-term wealth through careful market analysis and community development patterns that couldn't be replicated by investors who prioritized quick profits over sustainable investment approaches that required patience, expertise, and respect for. Our partnership combined Robert's legal expertise with my analytical skills and market knowledge, creating investment strategies that minimized legal risks while maximizing long-term returns through careful property selection and professional management that maintained high standards for tenant relations and community involvement. Robert handled all legal aspects of property acquisitions, lease agreements, and regulatory compliance, while I focused on market analysis, property evaluation, and the day-to-day management decisions that determined whether properties generated consistent income and appreciation over time. Together, we developed acquisition criteria that prioritized properties with strong fundamentals, good locations with stable or improving demographics, sound construction that could be maintained cost-effectively, and rental markets that provided steady income with potential for gradual rent increases that matched inflation and local economic growth. These criteria helped us avoid the speculative investments and over-leveraged properties that destroyed many investors during economic downturns, while building a portfolio that provided consistent returns and long-term financial security regardless of short-term market fluctuations. Robert's legal background also provided crucial protection against the contract disputes, tenant problems, and regulatory issues that could devastate property investors who lacked proper legal knowledge and documentation. Every property acquisition included comprehensive legal review. Every lease agreement was carefully drafted to protect our interests while treating tenants fairly, and every major property decision was evaluated for potential legal consequences that could affect our overall investment strategy and portfolio performance. When Robert passed away in 2019, I inherited not only our substantial property portfolio, but also the legal and financial knowledge that he had shared with me throughout our 34-year partnership. Robert had ensured that I understood every aspect of our property holdings, from legal ownership structures to tax implications, to long-term estate planning strategies that would protect our investments and provide financial security for our families, while maintaining the property management standards that had made our portfolio successful and profitable. The stage was being set for a family housing arrangement that would test whether my stepson Derek viewed me as a property owner deserving respect and legal consideration, or as a dependent widow whose home ownership could be exploited and manipulated by someone who assumed his real estate license made him superior to decades of property investment expertise that he couldn't even begin to comprehend or appreciate. But Derek Morrison had no idea that the woman whose housing he was preparing to control and whose property rights he was planning to violate controlled the real estate empire that could either launch his career to extraordinary heights or destroy it so completely that he would never work in premium property markets again. The modest family home, where I would be told I should be, quote, to sleep outside, contained the same legal and financial expertise that had built a $15 million property portfolio, earned industry recognition, and established the professional relationships that determined which real estate agents succeeded and which ones disappeared into obscurity without ever understanding what went wrong. The family housing arrangement that seemed like generous assistance would become the most expensive mistake of Derek's life, and the bedroom he was about to take from me would cost him everything he thought he was building toward in the real estate world, where property ownership, professional relationships, and respect for established property rights determine who succeeds and who finds themselves homeless on the streets they thought others belonged on. Looking back now with the clarity that comes from watching someone's true character emerge through their treatment of elderly family members they consider beneath them, I can see that Derek Morrison's assumptions about my financial dependence and property vulnerability weren't sudden judgments formed during our first family meeting. They were carefully calculated assessments based on his belief that elderly widows represented housing opportunities that ambitious real estate professionals like himself could exploit through family relationships and emotional manipulation without legal consequences. From the moment my late husband's son Derek first contacted me in August 2022, 18 months after Robert's funeral, he demonstrated the kind of calculated sympathy that reveals someone's true motivations about family relationships and financial opportunities. Derek had graduated from the University of Connecticut with a business degree, completed his real estate licensing requirements through a 6-week accelerated program, and recently secured a position as a junior agent at Premier Properties, a mid-tier real estate agency in Stamford that specialized in what industry professionals called volume transactions, rather than the luxury properties and estate sales that required sophisticated market knowledge and established client relationships. Derek's professional credentials were adequate on paper, and he carried himself with the confident enthusiasm of someone who believed formal licensing and contemporary sales training automatically qualified him as superior to older property owners who had learned through decades of market experience rather than classroom instruction. He spoke fluently about current market trends, digital marketing strategies, and contemporary real estate technologies that prioritized quick transactions and social media presence over traditional client relationships, and detailed market knowledge that had sustained successful agents for generations. But what struck me immediately about Derek's approach to real estate and property ownership was his dismissive attitude toward any investment strategies that couldn't be traced to recent market trends or contemporary sales techniques. When he first visited our family home during his initial contact call, his reactions revealed someone who viewed traditional property ownership as outdated investment philosophy, rather than sophisticated long-term wealth building that contained decades of refined expertise and market knowledge. "Margaret, you've got a really beautiful traditional home here," Derek had commented while examining our family property with the appraising eye of someone evaluating potential financial opportunities, rather than showing genuine respect for family heritage and established homeownership. "The location is fantastic, and I can see this place has great bones, though it's obviously been set up for a different era of living and family needs. Robert and I lived here for 34 years and raised our family in this house," I had replied, watching Derek's eyes move systematically through rooms as he mentally cataloged property features and potential market value, rather than understanding the emotional significance and family history that made this house our home, rather than just a real estate asset. "That's wonderful that you have so many memories here," Derek had responded with the kind of diplomatic enthusiasm that sounded appreciative but actually conveyed assessment, as if family history was charming sentiment that had limited relevance compared to contemporary property utilization and market opportunities. "But I imagine it must be challenging to maintain a property this size now that you're on your own, especially with all the yard work and maintenance responsibilities that come with older homes." This exchange established the dynamic that would characterize Derek's relationship with my property ownership throughout the 8 months leading up to the family crisis that would destroy his real estate career. He consistently positioned himself as the knowledgeable professional who understood contemporary property markets, while subtly suggesting that my traditional homeownership represented burdens that required his guidance and potential intervention, rather than recognizing the investment expertise and property management experience that successful homeownership actually represented. Derek's background had prepared him to view property ownership through the lens of quick transactions and contemporary market trends, rather than understanding that long-term real estate investment often produced superior results precisely because it prioritized quality properties and patient wealth building over speed and convenience. His real estate education had taught him to analyze properties based on immediate sale potential, marketing efficiency, and transaction volume, metrics that completely missed the deeper principles of property investment that focused on long-term appreciation, community stability, and wealth preservation that protected against market volatility and economic uncertainty. During subsequent family visits, Derek's comments about my property ownership revealed a pattern of subtle manipulation disguised as professional concern and family assistance. He would ask questions about my property management methods that seemed helpful but actually demonstrated his assumption that elderly property owners needed guidance through contemporary market knowledge and professional real estate expertise, rather than understanding that traditional property ownership often reflected sophisticated investment strategies and decades of successful property management experience. "Margaret, I'm curious about your property maintenance approach," Derek had said during a family visit in October 2022, observing our professionally maintained landscaping and recently updated exterior features that reflected decades of careful property stewardship and investment in long-term property value preservation. "Have you considered modernizing some of these systems to reduce maintenance costs and improve energy efficiency?" Contemporary homeowners are really focused on smart home technology and automated systems that can help elderly residents manage properties more independently. "Our property maintenance has been professionally managed for 15 years, I had explained, referencing the property management services that maintained our home to the same standards as our investment properties, ensuring optimal condition and value preservation through proven maintenance schedules and qualified contractor relationships. We use the same maintenance protocols and contractor networks that service our other properties, which has proven very effective for preserving property value and ensuring reliable system performance." "Other properties?" Derek had asked with obvious surprise, apparently unaware that our family home was just one component of a larger property portfolio that included residential and commercial real estate throughout Fairfield County. "Do you mean rental properties or vacation homes?" "We own several investment properties that require coordinated maintenance and professional management," I had replied carefully, testing whether Derek would respect property ownership privacy or demonstrate the kind of inappropriate curiosity that suggested potential exploitation of family financial information. "Robert and I built a small property portfolio over the years that provides rental income and long-term investment growth." "That's impressive," Derek had said with renewed interest that seemed focused on financial opportunity rather than family respect or genuine appreciation for successful property investment. "Investment properties can be great wealth builders, though they require a lot of management time and expertise to handle tenant relations, maintenance coordination, and market analysis. It might be worth evaluating whether those properties still make sense for your current situation, especially if they're creating stress or taking time away from enjoying retirement." Derek's suggestion that my property investments might be stress or obstacles to enjoying retirement revealed his assumption that elderly property owners should simplify their financial holdings, rather than understanding that successful property management often became more rewarding and profitable with experience in established systems. His focus on current situation implied that my age or widowhood had somehow diminished my capacity for property ownership and investment management that had been successful for decades. Derek's attitude toward my property ownership reflected broader assumptions about elderly women and their role in contemporary real estate markets. To him, I represented a generation of property owners whose investment approaches had limited relevance to modern markets that prioritized efficiency, technology, and professional management over traditional ownership patterns and long-term investment strategies that had proven successful across multiple economic cycles. He consistently treated my property knowledge as outdated rather than experienced, asking questions that seemed designed to gather information for his own professional advancement rather than demonstrating genuine respect for the investment expertise and property management skills that successful long-term ownership actually required. During family gatherings, Derek would take notes about property features and maintenance approaches while framing his interest as learning family history, but his questions revealed commercial rather than personal motivations for understanding our property portfolio and investment strategies. Margaret, would you mind sharing some details about your property management approach? Derek had asked during a Christmas dinner in 2022, producing a small notebook that he claimed was for learning about successful investment strategies from experienced family members. I'd love to understand how you've approached tenant relations and property maintenance over the years, especially since you've been successful with multiple properties. The request seemed reasonable and even flattering, but I noticed that Derek's questions focused on specific operational details that would allow him to understand our property management systems, rather than appreciating the philosophy and long-term strategy that made property investments successful. He was treating my investment knowledge as technical information to be extracted, rather than expertise to be respected, through appropriate professional consultation and compensation. Property management success comes from building relationships with reliable tenants, maintaining properties to high standards, and understanding local markets well enough to make good acquisition decisions, I had explained, watching Derek's pen hover over his notebook as he waited for quantifiable information that would allow him to replicate investment success, without understanding the experience and judgment that actually determines successful property ownership. It requires patience, attention to detail, and commitment to serving tenants and communities rather than just extracting profits. But there must be some specific systems or metrics that guide decision-making, Derek had persisted, clearly frustrated that I wasn't providing the formulaic information he wanted to document and potentially apply to his own real estate career. Even relationship-based businesses have operational procedures and performance measures that determine success and profitability. His insistence on reducing property investment to measurable systems revealed that Derek fundamentally misunderstood the nature of successful real estate ownership, which relied on market knowledge, relationship building, and intuitive judgment that couldn't be captured in written procedures or learned through formal training alone. Traditional property investment succeeded precisely because it adapted to changing conditions and individual circumstances rather than following standardized approaches that ignored market nuances and community relationships. Derek's approach to my property ownership during family visits further demonstrated his assumptions about the limitations of traditional investment methods and elderly property owners' need for contemporary guidance and potential management assistance. He would examine property features and maintenance systems with the analytical interest of someone evaluating improvement opportunities, making comments that revealed his belief that contemporary real estate knowledge and modern management techniques could enhance properties that had been managed through traditional approaches and established contractor relationships. "This is such a well-maintained traditional property," Derek had commented during a family gathering in early 2023, examining our updated kitchen and recently renovated bathrooms that reflected ongoing investment in property improvement and modern convenience integration. "The classic style has real charm, though I wonder if some contemporary updates might improve functionality and market appeal for current buyer preferences and lifestyle expectations. Traditional properties often appreciate better than contemporary homes because they're built with higher quality materials and craftsmanship that stands the test of time," I had replied, testing whether Derek understood that traditional construction and classic design often provided superior long-term value compared to contemporary trends that prioritize style over substance and immediate appeal over lasting quality. "That's definitely true for some properties," Derek had agreed diplomatically, avoiding direct contradiction while implying that traditional features had limited appeal in contemporary markets. "But modern buyers often expect updated systems, energy-efficient appliances, and contemporary floor plans that accommodate current lifestyle preferences and family structures that have evolved significantly since traditional homes were designed." Derek consistently framed our conversations about property ownership in terms of limitations and potential improvements, rather than understanding that traditional properties often provided superior investment value, precisely because they had been built and maintained to higher standards than contemporary construction that prioritized cost efficiency over long-term durability and classic design that maintained appeal across changing style trends. But the most revealing aspect of Derek's attitude toward my property ownership was his assumption that my investment knowledge and management systems were freely available for him to study, document, and potentially incorporate into his own real estate career without any acknowledgement of their professional value or intellectual property significance. He treated my property expertise as family information rather than understanding that successful investment strategies represented valuable professional knowledge that deserved respect and proper consultation arrangements if used in commercial contexts. During a family gathering in March 2023, Derek had casually mentioned that he was developing marketing materials for his real estate practice that drew inspiration from traditional property management approaches. He had been, quote, researching and updating for contemporary applications. When pressed for details, he explained that he was creating, quote, modernized versions of classic investment strategies that maintained proven principles while incorporating, quote, contemporary market insights and technology applications. I'm working on client presentations that demonstrate how traditional property management wisdom can be enhanced through modern market analysis and digital property management tools, Derek had explained with obvious pride in his innovative approach to combining traditional knowledge with contemporary real estate technology. Instead of relying solely on relationship-based tenant management, I'm developing systematic approaches that preserve the personal touch while incorporating data analytics and automated communication systems that improve efficiency and scalability. What traditional management approaches are you using as the foundation for these contemporary improvements? I had asked, curious about whether Derek's research had included studying the specific systems and relationships that made our property portfolio successful, rather than simply appropriating general concepts for his own professional marketing purposes. I've been analyzing several traditional investment strategies and identifying the essential principles that can be preserved while updating the implementation methods for contemporary markets and client expectations. Derek had replied with the confident terminology of someone who believed that traditional property management could be improved through contemporary analysis and technological enhancement, rather than understanding that successful investment approaches often couldn't be updated without losing their essential effectiveness in community relationships. But Derek's explanation revealed that he was treating traditional property investment as raw material for his own professional development, rather than understanding that established investment strategies represented generations of market experience and relationship building that couldn't be appropriated without proper acknowledgement and understanding of their community context and long-term implementation requirements. Derek's real estate position at Premier Properties had reinforced his assumptions about the superiority of contemporary market approaches over traditional investment methods that required patience and relationship building rather than quick transactions and high-volume sales activity. The agency specialized in what its managing broker called efficient property transactions that prioritized rapid turnover and digital marketing over detailed market knowledge and established client relationships that sustained successful agents through multiple market cycles. Working in this environment had taught Derek to view traditional property ownership as inefficient investment approach rather than understanding that patient property ownership often produced superior long-term returns through careful selection and professional management that maintained high standards for property condition and tenant relations. His professional success had come from participating in the contemporary real estate trend of maximizing transaction volume through digital marketing and aggressive sales techniques rather than building the deep market knowledge and client relationships that sustained agents during economic downturns and market transitions. Our agency philosophy is about leveraging technology and contemporary market analysis to provide clients with efficient property transactions that maximize value through strategic timing and competitive positioning, Derek had explained when describing his work at Premier Properties during a family dinner conversation. We focus on data-driven approaches that identify market opportunities and optimize property marketing through digital platforms and social media presence that reaches contemporary buyers more effectively than traditional marketing methods. But this philosophy actually represented short-term transaction focus rather than long-term client service, prioritizing immediate sales over the detailed market knowledge and ongoing client relationships that determined whether real estate agents provided lasting value to property owners and buyers who needed sophisticated guidance through complex property decisions that affected long-term financial security and community stability. Derek's confidence about his ability to improve traditional property management had grown throughout his first year of marriage to Robert's daughter Jessica, particularly as he gained more experience at Premier Properties and received positive feedback from agency management about his transaction volume and digital marketing effectiveness that appealed to younger clients who prioritized convenience over comprehensive market guidance and established agent expertise. His success with contemporary sales techniques had convinced Derek that he understood the essential principles of property ownership well enough to evaluate and potentially improve traditional investment approaches through formal real estate training and modern market analysis. He began speaking about traditional property management with the authority of someone who believed that analyzing and modernizing established investment strategies had given him expertise equivalent to decades of market experience and community relationship building. The thing about traditional property investment is that it often achieves good results through inefficient methods that can be streamlined without losing the essential benefits, Derek had explained during a conversation about real estate markets and contemporary investment trends. When you understand the data behind traditional investment patterns, you can preserve the important elements while eliminating time-consuming relationship management and subjective decision-making that can be replaced with systematic analysis and automated management tools. This attitude revealed Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of successful property investment, which achieved its results not despite relationship-based management, but because of the community connections and tenant relationships that created stable income and long-term appreciation through careful stewardship and responsive management that adapted to changing tenant needs and market conditions. But Derek's professional confidence and growing real estate experience had created a sense of authority that extended beyond his actual expertise, particularly in his interactions with family members whose property ownership he viewed through the lens of his formal training and contemporary market experience, rather than understanding the decades of successful investment and community relationship building that made traditional property ownership profitable and sustainable. By the spring of 2023, Derek had established himself in our family as the unofficial real estate expert, offering suggestions about property decisions for family gatherings, commenting on traditional investment methods with the authority of professional experience, and positioning himself as the bridge between our family's traditional property ownership and contemporary real estate markets that valued efficiency and technology over community relationships and long-term stewardship. I think it would be beneficial if Margaret could get some contemporary perspective on her property portfolio management, Derek had suggested during a family conversation about property ownership and financial planning. These traditional investment approaches have solid fundamentals, but they could really benefit from modern market analysis and professional property management that takes advantage of current technology and systematic tenant relations that reduce time investment while improving profitability. Traditional property management has been successful for our family for decades, Jessica had replied, apparently unaware that her husband was suggesting that her stepmother's property expertise needed improvement through his professional guidance and contemporary real estate knowledge. Of course it has been successful, Derek had clarified quickly, apparently realizing that his suggestion might have sounded disrespectful toward family investment history and established property management that had provided financial security for generations. I was thinking more about optimization and efficiency improvements that could help Margaret enjoy the benefits of property ownership without the time investment and management responsibilities that traditional approaches require. But Derek's clarification actually revealed that he didn't understand the difference between respecting established investment success and appropriating traditional knowledge for contemporary application that ignored the community relationships and market experience that made property investment profitable and sustainable over multiple economic cycles. Derek's growing confidence in his real estate expertise and his assumptions about traditional property ownership had set the stage for the family housing crisis that would reveal his true character and cost him everything he thought he was building in the real estate world, where community relationships, professional respect, and understanding of established property ownership determined who succeeded and who disappeared into professional obscurity. The modest family home where Derek would soon demand bedroom access had become, in his mind, an underutilized property resource managed by an elderly widow who needed professional guidance to optimize her housing situation and property portfolio through contemporary market analysis and strategic decision-making that could benefit the entire family through improved efficiency and potentially enhanced inheritance values. Derek had no idea that the woman whose property decisions he planned to influence and whose housing arrangements he was preparing to reorganize controlled the very real estate networks and professional relationships that could determine whether his career flourished or ended before he ever understood what had gone wrong. The family home that seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his real estate expertise and potentially gain housing advantages would become the most expensive miscalculation of his life about the true meaning of property ownership, family respect, and the cost of assumptions about elderly women whose investment expertise he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The stage was set for Derek Morrison to reveal whether he understood that family relationships required respect for established property ownership and financial independence, or whether he would choose to demonstrate the entitlement and exploitation that would destroy his real estate career and teach him that some elderly property owners possess the power to either elevate promising young agents to extraordinary success or eliminate them from premium markets entirely based on how they treat traditional property ownership and the women who have built successful investment portfolios through decades of market. The bedroom I maintained in our family home contained the same investment knowledge and market relationships that had built a $15 million property portfolio, but to Derek, it represented underutilized housing space that could be optimized through his contemporary real estate understanding and professional property management insights. His assumption that traditional property ownership needed improvement through modern market analysis and family intervention would cost him more than he could possibly imagine, and the family housing arrangement that should have been a respectful temporary assistance would become the beginning of consequences that would teach him the true value of honoring elderly relatives and respecting the property ownership rights they represent. Derek's notebook, full of documented investment strategies that he had accumulated during months of family gatherings, would become evidence of intellectual property appropriation rather than family knowledge sharing. His plans to modernize and commercialize traditional property management revealed professional opportunism that violated the trust and respect that family relationships required. His condescending attitude toward traditional investment approaches demonstrated the kind of professional arrogance that made him unsuitable for working with established property owners or community-based real estate that required understanding of long-term investment principles and respect for property ownership rights that had been earned through decades of market experience and financial sacrifice. Most devastatingly, Derek's assumption that elderly family members' property expertise was freely available for his professional advancement demonstrated the kind of family exploitation and intellectual property theft that made him unemployable at any real estate agency that maintained relationships with established property owners, traditional investment communities, or professional networks that protected property ownership rights from manipulation and commercial appropriation by agents who viewed family relationships as business opportunities rather than understanding that real estate success required building trust and demonstrating respect. The family housing arrangement that Derek viewed as an opportunity to demonstrate his real estate sophistication and potentially gain property access would reveal whether he understood that property ownership required respect, legal protection, and acknowledgement of the decades of investment expertise that successful property portfolios represented, or whether he would demonstrate the entitlement and exploitation that would cost him everything he thought he was building in the real estate world where reputation and community relationships determined long-term success and professional survival. While Derek Morrison was documenting my weak and suggesting improvements to my inefficient property management, he had absolutely no idea that he was critiquing the investment strategies of someone whose property portfolio and industry influence could destroy his real estate career with a single phone call to the right agency owner or professional association. The woman he viewed as a dependent widow whose property decisions needed contemporary guidance was actually Margaret Whitfield, the hidden power behind the most extensive private real estate investment network in Connecticut, whose recommendations could launch careers to million-dollar annual commissions, or end them before they started with systematic industry exclusion. What Derek didn't know, and what my stepdaughter Jessica had never fully understood despite growing up surrounded by our success, was that the modest 3-bedroom house in Maplewood Heights where I prepared family meals and hosted holiday gatherings was just the primary residence in a property portfolio worth over $15 million spread across 47 different properties throughout Fairfield County, Westchester County, and parts of Manhattan. The kitchen where Derek observed my traditional homeowner lifestyle was actually my personal planning center, where I coordinated property acquisitions, managed tenant relationships, and developed investment strategies that generated over $180,000 monthly in rental income from properties he could never afford to purchase, even with his real estate commission projections. The modest furnishings that Derek examined with polite curiosity during family visits weren't just comfortable family furniture. They were carefully selected pieces that reflected my preference for quality over ostentation, chosen to avoid drawing attention to the substantial wealth that our property investments had generated over 4 decades of strategic acquisitions and professional management. The family photos and traditional decorations that filled our home represented genuine family memories and cultural heritage, but they also served as protective camouflage that allowed me to maintain privacy about the scope of our financial success and property holdings. Every property document in my seemingly simple home office represented relationships and investment networks that Derek's agency could never access independently. The filing cabinets that he assumed contained typical homeowner paperwork actually held deeds to luxury estates, commercial property leases generating six-figure annual revenues, and partnership agreements with some of Connecticut's most exclusive property developers and institutional investors who controlled billion-dollar development projects throughout the Northeast Corridor. The financial statements that Derek might glimpse during family visits showed only the most basic information about our primary residence and obvious investment properties, carefully designed to provide accurate but limited disclosure that protected the full scope of our holdings from family members who might not understand the complexity of high-level property investment, or the potential risks of sharing detailed financial information with relatives who worked in competitive industries or had their own financial pressures and career ambitions. But beyond the physical evidence of wealth that I kept deliberately understated, what Derek completely failed to recognize was that my daily activities represented the same level of expertise and market analysis that had earned our investment company recognition as one of Connecticut's most successful private real estate portfolios, featured in industry publications and consulted by institutional investors who managed pension funds and university endowments seeking guidance on regional property markets and long-term investment strategies. My morning routine that Derek observed during overnight family visits included reviewing property reports from 47 different locations, analyzing market data from commercial real estate services that cost $50,000 annually to access, and coordinating with property managers who supervised maintenance and tenant relations for luxury apartment complexes, commercial office buildings, and retail developments that employed over 400 people and provided housing for more than 800 families throughout Connecticut and New York. The phone calls that Derek heard me making during family gatherings weren't just social conversations with elderly friends. They were strategic consultations with property attorneys who specialized in complex real estate transactions, tax accountants who managed sophisticated investment structures, and industry contacts who provided early access to development opportunities and off-market property sales that never appeared in public listings or MLS databases that junior agents like Derek used for their transaction research. The traditional investment knowledge that Derek was documenting for his own professional advancement was actually proprietary analysis methods that I had developed through decades of successful property acquisition, refined through multiple economic cycles, and validated through consistent performance that had outperformed most institutional investment funds and professional real estate investment trusts throughout the same time periods. When Derek watched me evaluate property maintenance requests or discuss tenant issues during family visits, he was actually observing master-level property management techniques that we taught as advanced courses through the Whitfield Property Institute, our exclusive training program that prepared property managers for luxury residential and commercial properties, requiring sophisticated tenant relations, maintenance coordination, and financial analysis that most property management companies couldn't provide at the level required by high-net-worth property owners and institutions. The Whitfield Property Institute was perhaps the most exclusive property management training program in the Northeast, accepting only 8 students per year through an application process more competitive than most MBA programs. Our graduates commanded starting salaries of $120,000 annually at luxury property management firms, and our alumni included property managers for some of the most prestigious residential and commercial developments in Manhattan, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Students paid $65,000 for our intensive 4-month program, which included hands-on training in luxury property management, internships at our premium properties, and personal mentorship from me and our network of industry professionals who managed billion-dollar property portfolios for institutional investors, family offices, and international real estate investment funds. The waiting list for admission extended over 2 years, and we regularly turned away property management professionals from prestigious firms who didn't meet our standards for analytical ability, professional ethics, and commitment to the community-focused property stewardship that distinguished our approach from transaction-oriented real estate that prioritized short-term profits over long-term value creation. What made our program unique wasn't just the training quality, It was the industry connections and career advancement opportunities that came with graduation. Whitfield Property Institute graduates had automatic access to property management positions that never advertised openings, received personal recommendations from industry leaders and institutional investors, and could leverage our network of alumni and professional partners to build careers that would be impossible to achieve through traditional property management, education, and industry networking. Derek's agency, Premier Properties, where he worked as a junior agent and believed he was building an impressive real estate career, was actually a mid-tier firm that depended on relationships with our supplier network for access to luxury listings and high-net-worth clients who required sophisticated market analysis and property management expertise that most residential agents couldn't provide. The premium properties that allowed Premier Properties to maintain credibility with affluent clients came through referral networks and professional relationships that we controlled through exclusive partnerships with property developers and institutional investors. More significantly, Premier Properties managing broker Patricia Brennan was actually a Whitfield Property Institute graduate from our 2015 class who had secured her management position through our career placement services and maintained ongoing consulting relationships with our investment company for staff training, market analysis, and client referrals that provided her agency with access to luxury property markets that would otherwise be dominated by larger firms with more established industry connections. The contemporary real estate strategies that Derek believed represented cutting-edge market innovation were actually simplified versions of investment analysis methods that we had developed and implemented successfully at our properties years before they became mainstream approaches adopted by residential agencies who lacked the sophisticated market knowledge and institutional relationships required for original strategy development and implementation. Derek's success with volume transactions and digital marketing was actually dependent on market conditions and client referrals that existed because of economic stability and property value appreciation that our investment activities had helped create throughout Fairfield County. The first-time homebuyers and small-scale investors who formed Derek's primary client base could afford properties in desirable neighborhoods because our development partnerships and community investment had created economic growth and property value stability that made homeownership accessible to working families and young professionals. But the most ironic aspect of Derek's assumptions about my property management was that he was actually observing master-level investment technique demonstrations every time he visited our family home during holidays and family gatherings. The maintenance decisions I made for our property, the contractor relationships I managed, the utility and service coordination I supervised. These were all advanced property stewardship methods that represented the kind of hands-on ownership expertise that separated successful long-term investors from property owners who relied entirely on professional management companies and lost the detailed market knowledge that determined optimal investment decisions. When Derek observed me negotiating with contractors about maintenance projects, he assumed I was using outdated homeowner approaches that could be improved through contemporary property management services and professional coordination systems. What he was actually watching was advanced cost analysis and vendor management that allowed me to maintain superior property conditions while achieving maintenance costs 30 to 40% below industry standards, through long-term contractor relationships and bulk purchasing arrangements that leveraged our entire property portfolio. The contractor selection methods that Derek wanted to modernize through digital platforms and competitive bidding systems were actually relationship-based vendor management that provided access to premium craftsmen and specialty services that most property owners couldn't obtain regardless of price. Our electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and landscaping contractors were carefully selected professionals who had worked with our properties for 10 to 20 years, understood our quality standards, and provided priority service and warranty protection that new contractors couldn't match, regardless of their competitive pricing or contemporary marketing presentations. My property maintenance scheduling that Derek viewed as time-consuming traditional management was actually precision maintenance programming that maximized property lifespans and minimized emergency repairs through preventative service coordination that most property management companies couldn't provide because they lacked the detailed property knowledge and long-term vendor relationships required for truly proactive property stewardship. Food industry analysts who had studied our property management methods found that the traditional hands-on ownership approaches created property value appreciation and tenant satisfaction rates that couldn't be duplicated using contemporary property management services or automated maintenance systems. The inefficient personal involvement that Derek considered outdated actually produced scientifically superior results that justified the time investment through property performance and tenant retention that contemporary management approaches rarely achieved. Derek's assumption that traditional property ownership needed improvement through contemporary management techniques revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of why our properties commanded premium rents and maintained waiting lists for available units spanning multiple months. Our success wasn't based on efficiency or automation. It was based on quality and personal attention that required hands-on ownership involvement and long-term relationship building, that most contemporary property management prioritized convenience over excellence. The community involvement and local market knowledge that Derek viewed as limiting traditional approaches actually represented our primary competitive advantage in markets where tenants could distinguish between property owners who understood community needs and those who viewed property ownership as passive income generation that ignored tenant satisfaction and neighborhood stability. Our properties succeeded precisely because we preserved and honored community-focused ownership that produced superior results, not despite their complexity and personal time requirements, but beyond the technical aspects of property management expertise. What Derek completely failed to understand was the scope of influence and industry control that our investment network represented. The traditional property owner, whose methods he was documenting, actually controlled enough industry relationships and financial resources to determine which real estate agents succeeded, which agencies received premium listings, and which property trends achieved mainstream acceptance throughout the Connecticut and New York property markets. Our investment company's property acquisition activities influenced market pricing and neighborhood development patterns for entire communities. Our tenant placement and property management services determined housing availability and rental costs for thousands of families. Our relationships with developers, municipal officials, and industry organizations affected which properties received development approvals and which neighborhoods experienced economic growth and infrastructure investment. When real estate agents throughout Fairfield County marketed properties to potential buyers, they often consulted with our property managers for context about neighborhood trends, property values, and development plans that affected long-term investment potential. Our recommendations influenced which properties received serious buyer interest, which agents gained credibility with affluent clients, and which marketing approaches achieved success in competitive luxury markets, where buyers required sophisticated market analysis and detailed neighborhood knowledge. The Connecticut Association of Realtors regularly consulted with our organization about regional property trends when developing position papers and policy recommendations that affected real estate regulation and industry standards throughout the state. Our expertise in long-term property investment and community-based development helped determine which contemporary market approaches maintained sufficient quality and community benefit to warrant professional endorsement, and which strategies were dismissed as speculative manipulation that ignored community stability and long-term property value preservation. Major real estate publications, including Connecticut Magazine, Westchester Magazine, and regional sections of the Wall Street Journal, featured our properties and investment strategies regularly in articles about successful property ownership, neighborhood development, and traditional investment approaches that preserved community character while generating excellent returns for property owners who understood long-term value creation over short-term transaction profits. But our influence extended beyond media recognition to practical industry control through property networks, professional relationships, and financial resources that affected real estate operations throughout the region. Agencies that maintained positive relationships with our organization gained access to luxury listings, qualified client referrals, and industry connections that provided competitive advantages impossible to achieve independently through contemporary marketing and transaction volume strategies. Conversely, agents that demonstrated unprofessional behavior, community insensitivity, or exploitation of elderly property owners found themselves unable to access premium properties, hire qualified staff, or receive positive referrals from the professional networks that determine success in high-value real estate markets, where reputation and community relationships were more important than marketing efficiency and transaction speed. The industry influence that Derek would soon experience wasn't just theoretical punishment. It was a practical reality that had ended careers of agents and closed agencies that violated the professional standards and community respect that we maintained throughout our network of property relationships and business partnerships. Previous examples of this industry influence included the case of Metropolitan Realty, an agency in Greenwich that had gained initial success by aggressively pursuing elderly property owners and pressuring them to sell properties below market value for quick transactions that generated immediate commissions, while ignoring the financial damage to elderly sellers who needed maximum proceeds for retirement security and healthcare costs. When we investigated and confirmed that Metropolitan Realty was systematically exploiting elderly property owners through high-pressure sales tactics and inadequate market analysis, our network of professional contacts, property developers, and industry organizations gradually withdrew support from their operations. Within 10 months, Metropolitan Realty lost access to luxury listings when property developers chose not to work with agencies that demonstrated poor professional ethics, received negative coverage from real estate publications that respected community-focused property ownership, and found themselves unable to hire qualified agents who understood that professional success required maintaining trust and community respect rather than maximizing short-term transaction volume. The agency eventually closed after losing clients who recognized the difference between professional real estate service and exploitative sales tactics, and the managing broker found himself unable to secure positions at other agencies because his reputation for elderly exploitation had spread throughout our professional network and industry associations that valued community protection and ethical property representation. Another example involved a real estate agent named Kevin Walsh, who had developed a strategy of befriending elderly widows in affluent neighborhoods, gaining their trust through social visits and assistance with household tasks, then convincing them to sell their properties for below-market prices to investors who paid Walsh substantial referral fees for access to undervalued properties in desirable locations. Kevin's exploitation involved systematically identifying recently widowed women in expensive neighborhoods, approaching them through church groups and community organizations, and gradually convincing them that their properties were becoming too much to manage, and that selling quickly to cash buyers would eliminate the stress and complexity of traditional real estate transactions while providing immediate funds for simplified living arrangements. When Kevin's manipulation tactics came to our attention through industry contacts and community members who were concerned about elderly exploitation patterns, our response was comprehensive and systematic. Professional associations received detailed information about Kevin's targeting methods and exploitation tactics. Property developers who controlled luxury listings in target neighborhoods received warnings about Kevin's practices and documentation of his elderly manipulation strategies. Industry publications that covered real estate ethics and community protection began including discussions about recognizing and preventing elderly property exploitation, with specific examples of manipulation tactics and the importance of protecting vulnerable property owners from agents who prioritized quick commissions over client welfare and fair market representation. Within 4 months, Kevin had lost credibility with professional networks that valued ethical practice and community protection, faced significant restrictions on accessing luxury properties when developers and property owners chose to work with agents who demonstrated respect for elderly clients, and struggled to maintain his real estate license when professional associations received complaints about his targeting and manipulation of vulnerable elderly women for financial exploitation. Kevin eventually left real estate entirely and attempted to pursue other sales careers, but found that his reputation for elderly exploitation had made him unemployable in any professional position that required building trust with clients or community members who valued ethical behavior and respectful treatment of vulnerable populations. These examples demonstrated that our industry influence wasn't based on vindictive retaliation but on professional standards and community protection that preserved ethical real estate practice from commercialization and exploitation by agents who viewed vulnerable property owners as opportunities for manipulation rather than understanding that successful real estate careers required building trust, providing competent market analysis, and protecting client interests regardless of potential commission impacts or transaction convenience. Derek Morrison, with his notebook full of my traditional investment strategies and his plans to create modernized versions of my property management for contemporary client applications, was about to discover that some elderly property owners possessed the power to either launch real estate careers to extraordinary heights or end them completely based on how those ambitious young agents chose to treat property ownership expertise, and the women who had built successful investment portfolios through decades of community involvement and professional excellence. The family housing arrangement that Derek viewed as an opportunity to observe traditional property management and potentially gain housing advantages would reveal whether he understood that property ownership required respect, professional ethics, and acknowledgement of the decades of expertise that successful investment portfolios represented, or whether he would demonstrate the entitlement and exploitation that would cost him everything he thought he was building in the real estate world. The modest bedroom where Derek was about to demand accommodation was actually part of a property that served as the headquarters for a $15 million investment empire, and the woman he was preparing to evict controlled enough industry influence to determine whether promising young real estate agents achieved their career dreams or disappeared from professional property markets forever, depending on how they chose to honor or exploit the property ownership expertise that represented the foundation of successful real estate investment in Connecticut. Derek had no idea that every conversation about property management improvements, every suggestion about modernizing traditional investment approaches, and every assumption about his right to document and adapt my property expertise was being observed and evaluated by someone whose industry influence could determine whether his real estate career flourished or ended permanently, with systematic exclusion from the professional networks and client relationships that determine success in Connecticut's competitive property markets. The woman Derek viewed as a source of traditional investment knowledge and potential housing opportunity was actually documenting his professional presumption, intellectual property appropriation, and family exploitation that would ultimately provide the justification for industry consequences that would teach him the true cost of treating elderly relatives' property expertise as free resources for career advancement and personal housing advantages. The stage was set for Derek to face the ultimate test of his character and professional ethics during a family housing crisis that would reveal whether he understood that property ownership deserved respect and legal protection, or whether he would demonstrate the entitlement and exploitation that would cost him everything he thought he was building in the real estate world, where community relationships and professional respect determined long-term success and industry acceptance. The family home that seemed like an opportunity for Derek to demonstrate his real estate knowledge and potentially establish permanent housing arrangements would become the most expensive miscalculation of his life about the true meaning of property ownership, family respect, and the cost of assumptions about elderly women whose investment expertise and industry influence he couldn't even begin to comprehend or properly value. What would Derek have done if he had known that the, quote, dependent widow whose bedroom he was planning to commandeer actually controlled the property networks and professional relationships that could make him the most successful agent in Connecticut, or ensure that he never worked in real estate again? Have you ever encountered people who assumed your knowledge and resources were freely available for their exploitation because they viewed you as powerless or outdated, not realizing that you controlled the very systems they depended on for their own success and advancement? The housing arrangement that Derek believed would demonstrate his authority and real estate expertise would become a masterclass in why professional success requires respecting those who came before you, understanding that traditional knowledge often represents superior expertise, and recognizing that elderly relatives may possess the power to determine your entire career trajectory based on how you choose to treat their property rights, investment knowledge, and lifetime achievements in building wealth through community-focused real estate investment that benefits everyone involved rather than exploiting opportunities for personal advancement. The first clear indication that Derek Morrison viewed my property ownership as his personal housing resource to exploit, rather than family real estate to respect, came during our 4th of July gathering in July 2023, just 3 months before the family crisis that would destroy his real estate career. What initially seemed like casual interest in family property and housing arrangements gradually revealed itself as systematic evaluation of occupancy opportunities and inheritance potential that Derek planned to access through family manipulation and elderly exploitation, without any regard for property ownership rights or legal boundaries. During the Independence Day weekend preparation, Derek arrived at our house 6 hours early, claiming he wanted to quote, help with party setup and spend quality time with family while Jessica handled their twin toddlers. His eagerness to participate seemed thoughtful and appropriate for a family member who wanted to contribute to holiday celebrations, but his behavior throughout the weekend revealed concerning patterns that suggested residential evaluation rather than genuine family involvement or respectful assistance with holiday hosting. "Margaret, this house has such great entertaining space," Derek announced as he systematically examined our dining room, living areas, and outdoor spaces, photographing room layouts and measuring spaces while claiming he was documenting family memories and learning about traditional home design. "You've really maximized the potential of this floor plan, though I imagine it must be overwhelming to maintain all this space just for yourself, especially during holidays when you're doing all the cooking and hosting work independently." But instead of observing our property with the respectful appreciation of someone enjoying family hospitality, Derek approached our holiday hosting with the analytical assessment methods of someone evaluating residential potential and household management systems. He questioned our heating and cooling costs, examined our storage areas and closet space, and asked detailed questions about property taxes and maintenance expenses that revealed his interest in financial aspects of homeownership rather than cultural significance of family gatherings and traditional holiday celebrations. "How do you manage the utility costs for a property this size?" Derek asked, while systematically photographing our basement utility systems and taking notes about electrical panels, water heaters, and HVAC equipment. "I'm thinking about energy efficiency and cost optimization for larger homes, especially for single residents who might not need to heat and cool every room during different seasons and usage patterns. Our utility costs are managed through the same efficiency systems we use for all our properties," I replied, testing whether Derek understood that our family home was maintained to professional property management standards rather than typical residential approaches that prioritized convenience over cost-effectiveness and long-term system performance. "All your properties?" Derek asked with obvious surprise and renewed interest, apparently still unaware that our family home was just one component of a larger property portfolio that included commercial and residential real estate throughout Connecticut and New York. "Are you talking about rental properties or investment real estate?" "We maintain several properties that require coordinated systems management and professional maintenance standards," I explained carefully, observing Derek's reaction to determine whether he would respect property ownership privacy or demonstrate the kind of inappropriate financial curiosity that suggested potential exploitation of family property information for his own professional or residential advantage. Derek's response revealed concerning assumptions about elderly property ownership and his right to evaluate family real estate for potential personal benefits. Instead of acknowledging the privacy boundaries that should surround family financial information, he began asking specific questions about property management costs, tenant relationships, and investment returns that suggested he was treating our family gathering as an opportunity to conduct informal property consultation and gain access to proprietary investment information without proper professional consultation arrangements. "That's really impressive property management experience," Derek said while continuing to document our home systems and taking detailed notes about property features and maintenance approaches. "I'd love to learn more about your portfolio strategy and management systems, especially since property investment is becoming such an important part of contemporary financial planning and wealth building for families who understand long-term real estate opportunities." His enthusiasm for learning about our property investments seemed professionally appropriate, but his systematic documentation efforts and focus on financial details revealed that Derek was treating my property expertise as free consultation, rather than understanding that successful investment strategies represented valuable professional knowledge that deserved respect and appropriate compensation if used for commercial purposes or career advancement. During our July 4th cookout, Derek's behavior became increasingly presumptuous about family property access and his apparent entitlement to evaluate our real estate holdings for potential personal advantage. He examined our outdoor entertainment areas, photographed our landscaping and pool facilities, and asked detailed questions about property maintenance costs and neighborhood property values that suggested he was conducting informal property appraisal rather than enjoying family hospitality and holiday celebrations. "This outdoor space is fantastic for entertaining," Derek commented while taking extensive photos of our pool area, outdoor kitchen, and landscaped gardens that we had developed through professional landscape design and maintained through ongoing relationships with specialty contractors. "The property value enhancement from these improvements must be substantial, especially in this neighborhood where outdoor living space commands premium pricing in the current market." "We designed these spaces for family enjoyment rather than property value enhancement," I replied, testing whether Derek understood that our property improvements reflected lifestyle priorities and family gathering needs, rather than investment strategies focused on maximizing resale value and market positioning for potential property sales. Of course, family enjoyment is the primary consideration, Derek agreed diplomatically, apparently recognizing that his commercial focus might sound inappropriate during family gatherings. But it's impressive how you've created improvements that serve family needs, while also enhancing property value and market position for future considerations and long-term financial planning. But Derek's continued focus on property values and market positioning revealed that he was viewing our family property through commercial real estate analysis, rather than understanding that our home improvements represented personal investment in family comfort and traditional entertaining that prioritized cultural heritage and family relationships over financial optimization and potential market advantages. The most troubling aspect of Derek's behavior during our Independence Day gathering was his gradual assumption of authority over property decisions and household arrangements. Throughout the weekend, he began making suggestions about furniture placement, room utilization, and space organization that revealed his belief that our family home could be optimized through his contemporary real estate knowledge and professional property management insights. Margaret, have you considered reconfiguring some of these spaces to maximize functionality and improve traffic flow? Derek suggested while examining our living room and dining room arrangements that had been designed for family gatherings and traditional entertaining. Contemporary home staging techniques could really enhance the usability of these traditional floor plans and create more efficient space utilization for modern living patterns. Our room arrangements have worked well for our family for 34 years, I explained, watching Derek's expression as he processed the possibility that traditional home organization might reflect deliberate choices rather than outdated approaches that needed contemporary improvement and professional guidance. I'm sure they have worked well for traditional family patterns, Derek replied with the diplomatic condescension of someone who believed contemporary lifestyle expertise could improve traditional home management. But modern families often benefit from space optimization and furniture arrangements that accommodate contemporary entertainment preferences and social interaction patterns that have evolved significantly since traditional homes were originally designed and furnished. Derek's assumption that our family home needed optimization and improvement through his professional guidance revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of traditional property ownership, which achieved superior results through time-tested approaches and family-focused design priorities rather than contemporary efficiency metrics and market-driven space utilization that prioritized appearance over functionality and cultural heritage. During the weeks following our July 4th gathering, Derek's comments about our family property became increasingly proprietary and presumptuous, as he gained confidence in his relationship with our family and his perceived authority to evaluate and potentially influence our property decisions. He began discussing our home as if he had ongoing involvement in property management decisions, making suggestions about improvements and modifications that revealed his assumption that family relationships provided him with consultation authority and potential residential access. I've been thinking about Margaret's property situation, Derek mentioned during a phone conversation with Jessica in late July, apparently unaware that I could hear his comments from the adjacent room. She's got a beautiful property with great potential, but it seems like there might be opportunities to optimize the space utilization and reduce the maintenance burden that comes with managing a large property independently. What kind of optimization are you thinking about? Jessica asked, apparently unaware that her husband was discussing plans to modify her stepmother's property ownership and potentially gain residential access through family intervention and elderly assistance arrangements. Well, for example, she's only using 2 bedrooms regularly, but the house has 4 bedrooms plus additional spaces that could be reconfigured for more efficient use, Derek explained with obvious confidence in his property analysis and space planning expertise. If she had family assistance with property management and household coordination, she could maintain her independence while benefiting from shared housing arrangements that would reduce her costs and provide family support for aging in place. Derek was describing a systematic plan to establish residence in our family home under the guise of providing, quote, family assistance and aging in place support, while actually gaining access to valuable housing and potentially positioning himself for inheritance advantages through gradual assumption of household authority and property management responsibilities. That sounds like it could be helpful, Jessica replied, apparently unable to recognize that her husband was proposing family exploitation and elderly manipulation, rather than genuine assistance that respected property ownership rights and maintained appropriate boundaries around family financial relationships. I think Margaret would really benefit from having family members who understand contemporary property management and can help her navigate the complexities of maintaining multiple properties as she gets older, Derek continued, revealing that he had been researching our property holdings and developing strategies for gaining access to our investment portfolio through family relationships and elderly assistance manipulation. His casual mention of multiple properties demonstrated that Derek had been systematically investigating our family's financial holdings, despite our efforts to maintain privacy about the scope of our investment portfolio and property management activities. The information could only have come from public records research or professional real estate database searches that revealed the extent of his inappropriate curiosity about family property ownership. By August 2023, Derek's behavior had escalated to direct suggestions about family housing arrangements and his potential residence in our family home. During a family dinner conversation, he began proposing temporary housing arrangements that would allow him and Jessica to help with property maintenance and household management while they saved money for their own home purchase and provided family support during my transition to retirement living. Margaret, Jessica and I have been discussing family arrangements and how we might be able to help each other during this transitional period, Derek announced during dinner, apparently having planned this conversation without consulting me about my interest in family assistance or housing arrangement modifications. We're thinking about the possibility of temporarily moving in here to help with property maintenance and provide companionship while we save money for our own house purchase. What kind of help did you think I needed with property maintenance? I asked directly, testing whether Derek would acknowledge that our property was professionally maintained to standards that exceeded most residential properties, or whether he would continue assuming that elderly homeowners needed family assistance with property management responsibilities. Oh, I don't mean that you can't manage the property, Derek clarified quickly, apparently realizing that his suggestion might sound presumptuous or disrespectful toward my property ownership competence. I was thinking more about sharing the responsibility and costs while providing family companionship and mutual support that would benefit everyone involved. But Derek's clarification revealed that he didn't understand the difference between offering genuine family assistance and proposing residential arrangements that would benefit him more than the elderly property owner, who would be providing valuable housing and potentially compromising privacy and independence for the convenience of family members who needed affordable accommodation. Traditional family assistance usually involves helping elderly relatives with specific needs rather than moving into their homes, I replied, watching Derek's reaction to determine whether he understood that family support should prioritize elderly relatives' preferences and independence rather than providing housing solutions for younger family members who had their own financial motivations and residential needs. Of course, we would only want to do this if it was genuinely helpful and something you were comfortable with, Derek responded diplomatically, but his continued persistence revealed that his primary motivation was gaining housing access rather than providing assistance that respected my property ownership autonomy and family relationship boundaries. The housing arrangement proposal that Derek presented as mutual assistance was actually a systematic plan for establishing residence in our family home, gaining access to our property management information, and potentially positioning himself for inheritance claims through gradual assumption of household authority and property decision-making responsibilities that could compromise my independence and property ownership rights. During September 2023, Derek's pressure for family housing arrangements intensified as he and Jessica faced increasing rental costs for their current apartment and began viewing our family home as a solution to their housing affordability challenges. Derek's suggestions became more direct and persistent, as he attempted to convince both Jessica and me that family co-residence would provide benefits that justified compromising our household privacy and property ownership autonomy. The rental market is becoming impossible for young families, Derek explained during a family gathering in early September, apparently attempting to generate sympathy for their housing costs while positioning residence in our family home as a reasonable solution to contemporary housing affordability challenges. We're paying $4,200 monthly for a two-bedroom apartment that's smaller than any single floor of this house, and that money isn't building any equity or long-term financial security. Contemporary housing costs are challenging for many families, I acknowledged, testing whether Derek would accept sympathetic acknowledgement without assuming that family financial difficulties created obligations for elderly relatives to provide housing solutions that compromise their own independence and property ownership rights. That's exactly why family arrangements can be so beneficial, Derek continued with obvious hope that I was becoming receptive to his housing proposal. Instead of us paying rent to strangers, we could contribute to property maintenance and household costs here, while providing companionship and assistance that would benefit everyone involved. But Derek's reasoning revealed that he viewed family relationships as financial opportunities, rather than understanding that elderly relatives' property ownership deserved protection from exploitation by younger family members who face their own economic pressures and housing needs that should be solved through their own resources, rather than family property access and elderly accommodation. The final escalation of Derek's presumptuous behavior occurred during our family gathering on October 7, 2023. Exactly 1 week before the housing crisis that would destroy his real estate career. Derek arrived at our house with moving boxes in his car, apparently assuming that our previous conversations had established permission for him to begin establishing residence in our family home without explicit invitation or formal housing arrangements that respected property ownership boundaries. I brought some of our essential items so we can start transitioning gradually, Derek announced while unloading boxes from his vehicle, apparently believing that his previous housing suggestions had been accepted, rather than understanding that polite family conversation didn't constitute agreement to provide residential accommodation and property access. What kind of transition are you planning? I asked directly, observing Derek's assumption that he could begin moving possessions into our family home without explicit permission or formal arrangements that acknowledged property ownership rights and household authority boundaries. Just temporary arrangements while we coordinate the official housing transition, Derek replied with obvious confidence that our family relationship justified residential presumption and gradual establishment of household presence that would become permanent residence through incremental assumption of occupancy rights. Derek's behavior demonstrated classic patterns of elderly property exploitation, gradual assumption of authority, systematic boundary violations, and presumptuous residential access that relied on family relationships to avoid legal scrutiny, and formal housing arrangements that would protect elderly property owners' rights and independence. The housing crisis that would destroy Derek's career was planned for Saturday, October 14, 2023, as Derek and Jessica's official move-in date to our family home. What Derek viewed as the successful culmination of his housing strategy and potential access to family property wealth would become the most expensive miscalculation of his life, revealing his true character when he believed he was among people who couldn't threaten his rising career or challenge his residential entitlement. On the morning of October 14th, Derek arrived with a moving truck and additional family members to facilitate their relocation into our family home, apparently confident that his previous conversations had established permission for permanent residence and household integration that would provide him with valuable housing and potential inheritance positioning. "We're so excited to finally make this family arrangement official," Derek announced while directing movers toward our front door, apparently believing that contemporary family relationships allowed adult children to establish residence in elderly relatives' homes without formal legal arrangements or explicit property owner consent. "What official arrangements are you referring to?" I asked calmly, positioning myself to prevent moving equipment from entering our home while Derek realized that his assumptions about family housing permission might have been incorrect. "The family housing arrangement we've been discussing for months," Derek replied with obvious confusion and growing irritation that I wasn't facilitating his residential transition as he had apparently expected. "Jessica and I moving in to help with property maintenance while we save money for our own house purchase." "I don't recall agreeing to any residential arrangements," I explained clearly, watching Derek's expression change as he began to understand that his housing assumptions had been based on his own wishful thinking rather than actual family agreements or property owner consent. "But we've talked about this repeatedly," Derek protested with growing anger that revealed his true character when family accommodation didn't proceed according to his expectations and residential entitlement plans. "You know we need affordable housing, and this property has plenty of space that isn't being utilized efficiently." Derek's response revealed his fundamental assumption that elderly property owners had obligations to provide housing solutions for younger family members, and that property ownership created family responsibilities, rather than understanding that residential arrangements required mutual agreement and formal legal protections for all parties involved. Property ownership doesn't create obligations to provide housing for family members, I replied firmly, testing whether Derek would accept property ownership boundaries or demonstrate the entitlement and manipulation that would justify the industry consequences I was prepared to implement. "That's a pretty selfish attitude toward family," Derek responded with obvious anger and disappointment that his housing strategy wasn't succeeding as planned. "We're offering to help with property maintenance and costs while providing companionship and family support. But apparently you'd rather live alone than help family members who are struggling with housing affordability." Derek's manipulation attempt revealed classic elderly exploitation tactics: emotional guilt, family obligation pressure, and characterizing property ownership autonomy as selfishness, rather than legitimate boundary maintenance and legal protection of property rights that elderly owners deserved, regardless of family financial circumstances. Family support should respect property ownership boundaries rather than creating residential obligations, I explained, observing Derek's increasing frustration and anger, as his housing manipulation failed to achieve the residential access he had apparently planned and expected. "Fine," Derek said with cold anger that revealed his true character when elderly family members didn't accommodate his housing demands and property access expectations. "If that's your attitude toward family, then maybe you should reconsider whether you even need this much space for yourself." Derek was revealing the underlying entitlement and property coveting that had motivated his months of family manipulation and housing pressure, demonstrating that his apparent concern for my welfare and family relationships had actually been strategies for gaining residential access and potential property control. "I'll reconsider my property arrangements," I replied calmly, making the decision that would teach Derek the most expensive lesson of his life about property ownership rights and the consequences of attempting to exploit elderly family members who possessed more power and influence than he could possibly comprehend. But Derek wasn't finished revealing his character and assumptions about elderly property ownership. As his moving truck waited in our driveway and his housing strategy collapsed, he made the comment that would destroy his real estate career and cost him everything he thought he was building in property markets, where respect for elderly property owners determined professional success and industry acceptance. "You know what, Margaret?" Derek said with cruel confidence that revealed his true feelings about elderly property ownership and family relationships. "Maybe you should be grateful that family members even want to live with someone your age. Most elderly people would appreciate having family companionship instead of rattling around alone in houses that are too big for them to manage independently. If you're not willing to share this space with family who actually care about you, then maybe you should consider whether you deserve to live in such luxury, while younger families struggle with housing costs and rental payments that prevent them from building wealth and achieving the American dream of homeownership." Derek was expressing the classic entitlement mentality that justified elderly property exploitation, the belief that elderly property owners didn't deserve valuable real estate if they weren't sharing it with younger family members, and that housing affordability challenges created moral obligations for elderly relatives to provide residential solutions regardless of their own preferences and property ownership rights. But Derek still wasn't finished demonstrating his character and revealing the depth of his entitlement toward family property ownership. As I remained calm and unmoved by his manipulation attempts, he escalated to direct insults and threats that would provide perfect justification for the industry consequences that would end his real estate career permanently. "Honestly, Margaret, you should be grateful for the chance to sleep outside and toughen up instead of living in climate-controlled comfort while real families struggle to afford basic housing." Derek continued with increasing anger and cruelty. "Maybe a few nights on the street would give you some perspective about how fortunate you are to own property that you obviously don't appreciate or deserve. People your age lived through tougher times and didn't expect luxury housing and perfect comfort. Maybe some outdoor sleeping would remind you what real hardship feels like and help you understand why family cooperation and sharing resources is more important than selfish property hoarding." Derek Morrison had just told the woman who controlled a $15 million property portfolio and the industry networks that determined real estate career success that she should be, quote, to sleep outside and experience real hardship, while he claimed her bedroom an established residence and property that represented decades of investment expertise and professional achievement that he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But Derek had no idea that the woman he was insulting and threatening with homelessness was Margaret Whitfield, owner of Whitfield Property Holdings, whose recommendations could either launch real estate careers to extraordinary success or destroy them so completely that the offending agents would never work in premium property markets again. The silence that followed Derek's threats was absolute. Jessica looked mortified by her husband's behavior, but clearly didn't understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Our other family members sat in stunned disbelief that someone would show such disrespect for property ownership and elderly family members. But I felt the calm clarity that comes from finally seeing someone's true character revealed completely. "Derek," I said quietly, setting down my coffee cup and looking directly at the young man who had just destroyed his real estate career through entitlement and elderly exploitation. "I think it's time you learned who you've been trying to manipulate for the past 8 months." "What do you mean?" Derek asked with obvious confusion, apparently unable to understand why his housing threats had created such tension among family members who should have supported his residential access and property sharing expectations. "I mean that the woman you just told should be, quote, grateful to sleep outside, controls the property networks and industry relationships that determine whether real estate agents like yourself succeed or disappear from premium markets entirely," I explained, watching Derek's expression change as he began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. "The selfish property hoarding you described represents a $15 million investment portfolio that includes some of the most valuable residential and commercial properties in Connecticut, and the luxury housing you think I don't deserve serves as headquarters for Whitfield Property Holdings, one of the state's most influential private real estate investment companies." Derek's face went pale as he began to comprehend that the elderly property owner he had been manipulating and threatening actually controlled the industry that determined his professional success or failure. "Margaret, I didn't realize," Derek stammered, but I wasn't finished explaining the consequences of his elderly exploitation and property entitlement. "The family cooperation you demanded represents systematic exploitation of elderly property ownership that violates the professional ethics standards maintained by every reputable real estate agency in Connecticut," I continued, with the calm authority of someone delivering justice rather than revenge. "The housing access you attempted to gain through manipulation and emotional abuse demonstrates exactly the kind of character flaws that make agents unemployable at agencies that value community respect and ethical treatment of elderly property owners. But more importantly," I added, delivering the lesson that would teach Derek the true cost of exploiting elderly relatives and assuming that property ownership created obligations to accommodate family housing demands, "the woman whose property rights you just threatened to violate controls the industry relationships that determine whether ambitious young agents like yourself succeed in real estate or find themselves excluded from premium markets permanently." Derek's notebook, full of documented investment strategies, suddenly represented evidence of intellectual property theft rather than family knowledge sharing. His housing manipulation became elderly exploitation that violated professional standards. His threats about outdoor sleeping revealed character flaws that made him unsuitable for working with any clients who required trust and ethical representation. "Margaret, please, I was just frustrated about housing costs," Derek pleaded, apparently believing that explaining his motivations would somehow minimize the consequences of threatening elderly family members and attempting to exploit property ownership through family manipulation. "Derek, you weren't frustrated about housing costs," I replied with the finality of someone delivering consequences that had been earned through months of manipulation and culminated in direct threats against elderly property ownership. "You were attempting to exploit family relationships to gain residential access and potential inheritance positioning through systematic boundary violations and emotional manipulation." The consequences for Derek began immediately and escalated rapidly as word of his behavior spread throughout our industry network. Within 24 hours of his housing threats and elderly exploitation, every major real estate agency in Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts had received detailed information about Derek's character flaws, manipulation tactics, and threats against elderly family members who maintained property ownership autonomy. Patricia Brennan, Derek's managing broker at Premier Properties and Whitfield Property Institute graduate, received a comprehensive report about Derek's elderly manipulation attempts along with documentation of his intellectual property theft and plans to commercialize family investment strategies without permission. Patricia terminated Derek's employment immediately, explaining that elderly exploitation and family manipulation violated the professional ethics standards that their agency maintained. Within 1 week, Derek discovered that every premium property developer in the region had been informed about his character flaws and elderly exploitation tactics, making it impossible for him to access luxury listings or high-value client relationships that required trust and ethical representation. Our supplier network received detailed information about Derek's manipulation and property entitlement, along with instructions to refuse cooperation with any agency that employed him. Real estate industry publications received comprehensive background information about Derek's elderly exploitation and property manipulation tactics. His name became associated with family exploitation and professional unethical behavior that made positive coverage impossible for any agency foolish enough to hire him, despite his reputation for elderly abuse and property entitlement. The Connecticut Association of Realtors received detailed documentation about Derek's violations of professional ethics and community trust standards. His real estate license came under review for behavior that violated the professional standards required for ethical property representation and community protection. Within 3 months of his housing threats and elderly manipulation, Derek had lost his real estate license, his industry reputation, his access to premium properties, and any possibility of working in professional real estate markets that valued ethical behavior and respect for elderly property owners. The ambitious agent who had planned to build his career by exploiting family property access and elderly accommodation found himself completely excluded from the industry that had once seemed to offer unlimited advancement opportunities. Derek made numerous attempts to restore his professional reputation through apologies, explanations of his housing frustrations, and promises about future respect for elderly property owners and family boundaries. He contacted real estate schools about remedial training in professional ethics, approached industry organizations about volunteer work that could demonstrate his commitment to community service, and even attempted to return documentation of proprietary investment strategies while claiming his manipulation had been misunderstood. But the damage was permanent and irreversible. The real estate industry, particularly agencies specializing in luxury properties and elderly client services, operates on relationships and reputation that require absolute trust and ethical behavior. Derek's threats against elderly family members had revealed character flaws that made him unsuitable for any professional role that required protecting client interests and maintaining community trust. Most devastatingly, Derek's housing manipulation and elderly exploitation demonstrated the kind of predatory behavior that made him unemployable at any agency that maintained relationships with elderly clients, family property owners, or community organizations that protected vulnerable populations from real estate manipulation and property exploitation. Within 6 months of telling me I should be, quote, asleep outside, Derek Morrison had been effectively blacklisted from the real estate industry, unable to secure employment at agencies that valued professional ethics, community respect, or protection of elderly property owners from manipulation and exploitation. Today, 5 years after his housing threats and elderly manipulation, Derek works as a part-time sales associate at a furniture store, selling budget bedroom sets to customers who can't afford the luxury properties he once hoped to represent. His real estate education, industry experience, and ambitious plans for property market success became worthless when he demonstrated that he viewed elderly family members as housing resources to be exploited rather than understanding that property ownership required respect, legal protection, and ethical treatment, regardless of family relationships or personal housing needs. The family home that Derek demanded access to continues serving as headquarters for Whitfield Property Holdings, where our property management generates over $180,000 monthly in rental income from luxury properties that Derek could never afford to purchase, even if he had maintained his real estate career and achieved the commission levels he had projected during his housing manipulation period. Our Whitfield Property Institute continues training 8 students annually in ethical property management and community-focused real estate investment, with graduates commanding premium salaries at luxury agencies throughout the Northeast. The waiting list for admission extends over 3 years, and we regularly receive applications from established real estate professionals who want to master the community relationship building and ethical property stewardship that Derek's exploitation and manipulation had completely violated. The property ownership expertise that Derek attempted to document and commercialize through family manipulation remains protected within our professional networks, shared only with students and agents who demonstrate genuine respect for elderly property owners and commitment to ethical community service that protects vulnerable populations from exploitation rather than targeting them for personal advantage and housing access. My modest bedroom in Maplewood Heights continues serving as the private residence of someone whose property investment expertise has provided housing for thousands of families, created wealth for hundreds of property owners, and maintained community stability through ethical real estate practices that protect elderly property owners from the kind of manipulation and exploitation that Derek's housing threats represented. Sometimes the most important lesson you can teach entitled family members is that property ownership isn't a family resource available for exploitation and manipulation, but private wealth that belongs to individuals who have earned the right to determine how their properties are used, shared, and protected from relatives who assume that family relationships create obligations to provide housing solutions and residential access regardless of property owners' preferences and legal rights. Derek Morrison learned that elderly property owners who appear to be vulnerable housing opportunities may actually control industry empires worth millions of dollars, possess the power to launch or destroy real estate careers, and maintain the professional authority to determine whether young agents deserve access to premium markets or should be excluded from property sales entirely based on their treatment of elderly clients and respect for community protection standards. The housing arrangement that seemed like an opportunity for Derek to demonstrate his real estate knowledge and gain valuable residential access became the most expensive lesson of his life about the true cost of elderly exploitation, property entitlement, and professional arrogance toward women whose property expertise and industry influence he couldn't even begin to comprehend or respect. What would you have done if someone threatened to make you sleep outside of your own property while demanding residential access and family accommodation that violated your property ownership rights and personal boundaries? Have you ever encountered people who assumed your property and resources were family obligations, rather than private wealth, that deserved protection from exploitation and manipulation by relatives who faced their own financial challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if this story has inspired you to examine your own assumptions about elderly relatives and property ownership rights, and the importance of treating family wealth with the respect and legal protection it deserves regardless of other family members' housing needs or financial pressures. And if you found this story of property justice and family boundary protection resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who discovered that exploiting elderly relatives and manipulating family property ownership can result in consequences more expensive than they could ever imagine, and more satisfying than justice usually provides in real life. Remember, property ownership isn't family obligation available for exploitation. It's private wealth that belongs to individuals who have earned the right to determine how their properties are used, shared, and protected for future generations, who understand that real estate success requires respecting those who built wealth through decades of investment expertise, rather than assuming they're obligated to provide housing solutions for family members whose financial challenges should be solved through their own resources and professional success. The bedroom that Derek demanded access to continues providing privacy and independence for someone whose property ownership has created opportunities for thousands of families, while the entitled stepson who threatened outdoor sleeping works retail sales in a furniture store, selling budget mattresses to customers who understand that housing comfort must be earned through personal achievement rather than family manipulation and elderly exploitation. Sometimes justice comes with compound interest, calculated over decades of ethical property investment, and payable in full to those who demonstrate that elderly property owners deserve respect, family boundaries require legal protection, and property wealth should be honored rather than exploited by entitled relatives who assume that contemporary housing challenges create moral obligations for elderly family members to compromise their independence and property ownership autonomy for the convenience of younger generations who haven't yet learned that real estate success requires building wealth through ethical community service. The most expensive housing arrangement of Derek's life cost him everything he thought he was building toward. While teaching thousands of viewers that property ownership represents sophisticated wealth creation that deserves respect, Family relationships require ethical boundaries that protect elderly relatives from exploitation, and elderly property owners may possess the power to determine entire professional futures based on how younger family members choose to treat their property rights, investment expertise, and lifetime achievements in building wealth through community-focused real estate development that benefits everyone involved rather than targeting opportunities